Hi, everyone. In this podcast, we're going to talk about the evidence practice gap. In the last podcast episode, we talked about the definition of evidence-based care and how it's like a three-legged stool, including research-based information to help you make decisions, an experienced provider to help you apply that information, and actively asking about the patient's values, goals, and preferences. Today, we're going to talk about the evidence practice gap. Researchers have found that on average, it takes about 15 to 20 years for something to be proven in medical research until it becomes routinely used in medical practice. So we have a problem, a disconnect, a break between what people want evidence-based care and what they're getting, which is care that is often based on the status quo and routines and traditions. Research shows that people want to be deeply involved in their healthcare decisions. They want all the components of evidence-based care, all three parts of the three-legged stool. But research shows that the majority in maternity care are not getting evidence-based care. You can learn more about the stats of what they're getting and not getting if you go look at our simple table that describes that at ebbirth.com/maternity care. So why do we have an evidence practice gap? There are a whole bunch of reasons for this gap. There was a really interesting study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association that looked at why specifically they looked at physicians don't always practice in line with evidence-based guidelines. Some of these reasons included not being aware of the evidence, not believing the evidence, preferring the status quo, not wanting anything to change. And then also some physicians think it's not going to change anything to change their practice, so why bother? In maternity care, we also have something called paternalism that also makes it really hard to change practice. I personally know a number of midwives, physicians, and nurses who are working so hard to bring evidence-based practice into their facilities and are having so much trouble doing it. There are a few places where they don't have trouble, but the vast majority of people I know who are trying to implement change are having a really hard time. So why is that? Well, a lot of it has to do with paternalism and the strict hierarchical top-down power structure in our maternity care system. Paternalism is defined as the policy or practice on the part of people in positions of authority of restricting the freedom and responsibilities of those subordinate to them in the subordinate's supposed interest. There is a heavy element of paternalism in maternity care. There's a lot of incentives to get clients to conform to routines, and there's penalties if the clients don't conform to routines. Paternalism affects people who are pregnant, but it also affects providers and healthcare workers in the system. They can often be penalized if their clients want care that is based on the client's values, goals, and preferences. For example, one person who's pregnant may decide that they do not want continuous fetal monitoring while they're in labor. They want something different that they feel is more evidence-based, and that is intermittent listening with a handheld Doppler device. Their doctor may be supportive of that, but the people higher up in the hierarchy may not be supportive of that. Hospital lawyers, hospital administrators. They may threaten that doctor with taking away that doctor's privileges to practice there if the client doesn't conform to the hospital's preferred treatment method. We have to understand that everybody in the system is under a lot of pressure. Paternalism is a systemic problem that requires a systemic solution. We go into a lot more detail about the hierarchy in our maternity care system in a 6-week course I teach for evidence-based birth professional members and instructors, all about how to help families get evidence-based care. But really the problem is when you have a top-down structure, the people at the bottom of the hierarchy feel powerless to create change. They may feel that they are inferior or not worthy of starting an evidence-based practice project and making change. In addition, if they try to create change, their changes or their suggestions may be squashed by people higher up in the authority chain. What's even worse is that people in the middle or the bottom of the hierarchy may fight amongst themselves because they feel so much stress from watching their clients receive substandard care, and they feel that they have so much responsibility but so little power. So they take their helplessness out by reacting and lashing out at other people at their same level on the hierarchy. This is called horizontal violence. And it's been well documented in midwifery and in nursing. It's also anecdotally seen among doulas as well. Horizontal violence can mean things like gossiping, backstabbing, sabotaging other people's work. In nursing, we often say that nurses eat their own young because they bully new nurses and belittle them. This is something that's not talked about enough. In fact, even I as a nurse, even though I experienced it and I knew that nurses eat their own young, I didn't understand why until I was in graduate school, and a professor finally explained to us that horizontal violence occurs when people have a lot of responsibility, but feel very little power to affect any kind of change. So I believe there are solutions to these overall systemic problems, and that we all need to come together and focus on what we have in common. And that is what we want is the best health for families and for babies. We can all do our part to focus on family-centered care. Ways we can do this include addressing our own feelings of powerlessness and helplessness, addressing our own internalized feelings of oppression, building bridges with people in positions of power, using better communication tools, addressing cultural changes that are needed, making changes at the policy level or the legislative level. And finally, I believe personally that we need a lot more love in this maternity care system all across the world. There are so many hurting people. Did you know that about 1 in 3 nurses and 1 in 3 midwives is walking around with symptoms of PTSD from traumatic things that they've witnessed in labor and delivery? How can we expect these people to effectively create change on a broad scale if they themselves are hurting so deeply? People who are patients in the maternity care system, moms, dads, partners, I think it's great if their eyes are open to the fact that hospital staff are often hurting people and that we need to show love to everybody that we meet in the system. Also, it's important for people to understand what the word intersectionality means. Intersectionality was first defined by the American feminist, legal scholar, and civil rights advocate Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. She used the term intersectionality to describe when you have overlapping or intersecting systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination. Hierarchies can occur on a multidimensional basis. Usually we just focus on one part of an injustice and say something like, well, it's just not fair that families are at the bottom of the hierarchy in maternity care, or midwives have less power than physicians. However, intersections often go overlooked. For example, you might be a midwife and lower down on the hierarchy in the maternity care system, but you're probably also a woman. So you're not only facing the medical system hierarchy, but you're also facing sexism. And what if you're also Black? So you're a Black female midwife. Then you're facing 3 intersecting systems of domination. Other overlapping parts of the system could include socioeconomic class, gender, sexuality, citizenship, being differently abled, age, or anything else that can put you at the bottom of a hierarchy. And if you think it's hard for a white, privileged woman such as myself to get evidence-based care, think about how hard it might be for somebody who is a person of color, or who has low income, or who's on Medicaid, or who does not speak English as their first language. We have to understand and appreciate that there are multiple systems and multiple hierarchies at play here. So everything I just talked about might seem a little heavy to you and might make you feel a little downhearted. And I just wanted to give you some encouragement and let you know that although we do have the evidence practice gap, and though a lot of people are still not able to easily access evidence-based care, that I am seeing improvements around the world. Over the past 6 years, as I've watched evidencebasedbirth.com grow and been involved in the global birth community, I have seen many improvements in healthcare systems around the world. Some places are making improvements faster than others. One great example is with skin-to-skin care after a cesarean. It used to be that if you wanted kangaroo care or skin-to-skin care with your baby in the operating room, it wasn't even an option. It was, quote, impossible. But now hospitals across the United States are beginning to offer this service, and in many other places around the world. And so this is just one example of how change, and often I believe this change comes from the ground up. It comes from consumers who are demanding this type of evidence-based care. And then it also comes from people higher up in the hierarchy who do have power, from physician champions and midwife champions and nurse champions and doulas and childbirth educators who are helping their clients navigate the system and request these types of evidence-based care. But at the same time, change is hard. There's no doubt about that. And many of you may still find yourself in systems that you feel are outdated and more based on traditions and routine than evidence. So in the meantime, how are you supposed to help yourself or to help your clients? Well, it's important for you to recognize the paternalism in the system so that when you face it or run up against it, you'll kind of understand what's going on. Also, you need to know that patients always have the right to informed consent and refusal. This means you have the right to say yes or no to things that are suggested to you without feeling pressured or coerced. The ideal situation to strive for as someone who's pregnant or someone who's providing care is when you have a care provider who lays out all the alternatives for you in a decision that you're making, including the option of doing nothing. The provider discusses potential benefits and potential harms with you, actively asks the client what they prefer, and then honors and respects the client's final decision. If you'd like to spend some time with people in your community discussing these topics and potential solutions in more detail, I'd love to encourage you to reach out to a local evidence-based birth instructor about hosting a Savvy Birth workshop for parents or Savvy Birth Pro workshop for professionals, where we really dig into these issues and brainstorm solutions for your unique communities. I'd also like to invite you to continue following me on these podcasts at Evidence-Based Birth as we talk about the evidence. And we will mostly be focusing on that first leg of the three-legged stool about the research evidence on different topics. But from time to time, you'll also hear me bring in elements of change. What I'm really passionate about is bringing change to the system so that more people can access that kind of evidence-based care, that three-legged stool that we're talking about. So stay tuned. The next podcasts are going to be so awesome. We are going to dive into the details of evidence on a whole bunch of hot topics, hopefully giving you or your clients powerful evidence-based information that you can use to talk with your care providers about these decisions that you're going to be making. Thanks so much, and I'm so excited to be going on this journey with you in these podcasts.